AI companion is on for those who haven't tested it out yet. And I think what I like the most is for catching you up on things that you, especially things you might have missed. And so like, what was that reference again? Or yeah, what'd you say about that? But anyway, I want to make sure to start off the conversation in earnest, and Tameka has been just one of my favorite journalists and thought leaders and innovators and lots of other things into marketing and tech and culture. And so just as we were starting up this Insider series and starting to get some guest speakers, Tameka was, if not the first person I reached out to, then like one of the first that week, where I was like, when can we get you here? Because you're just someone I always value having a conversation with, and I know, I mean, I'm just fascinated to hear what you're thinking about, especially for the year ahead, and even just what you're up to right now and what your interests are in the AI space. So I'll hand it over to you to share what you're up to now and how you, since you wear so many hats, it's like how you want to best introduce yourself, and then go from there.
Thank you so much, David, and thank you everyone for joining. David, you know what I think is also interesting is we kicked off this year with an event where we talked about AI at CES, right?
Yeah.
And so I think
we're on that session together there, yeah.
In that conversation. So I'm Tameka Kee. I am an advertising futurist. And what does that mean? That means I focus on how advertising is changing and evolving and shaping various industries, among other things. And I say that just because that's just who I am. It's who I've been my entire career. My day job, on the other hand, though, is I am the Deputy Managing Director of CIMM, which is the Coalition for Innovative Media Measurement, which is a division of the ARF, another acronym. But I landed in this role at the beginning of this year, and it actually kind of is one of those dream come true roles, because I've been an advertising nerd my entire life. As when I was a kid, I used to videotape commercials, and my family was like, "What's wrong with you? We're supposed to tape like TV shows." And so wind up in a role, I was also dating myself, right? Videotape. But to find myself in a role with an organization like the ARF that focuses on rigorous testing and kind of figuring out how to make the practice of advertising better. It's kind of a dream job. CIMM, we meet monthly virtual meetings, very similar to this, but we produce research projects that are focused on specifically media measurement. And so as an example, the types of projects that we put out, in the beginning of this year, we did a guide to the multi-currency transition. So helping both the buy side, so media owners and publishers, as well as the sell side. So the buy side agencies, pardon me, and the sell side media owners and publishers kind of figure out why, if you have your audience measured by, let's say, the 4 measurement providers, Nielsen, Comscore, VideoAmp, iSpot, right? How do their methodologies differ? We didn't benchmark them and say one methodology was better than the other, but it's like if Comscore tells you have 10 million users and iSpot says you have 12 million, here's how you can kind of calibrate that. And here's how, if you're a media owner, you need to talk to the buy side about what your audience looks like. And here's how, if you're an agency and you're getting these reports from these different vendors, how do you benchmark them? Another study that we recently completed is on the impact of privacy regulations, specifically on measurement providers, and because a lot of the studies on privacy are focused on targeting and focused on activation. But what about measurement? What about sort of how do these regulations impact how we're able to measure our audience? So we're super nerdy and wonky and researchy, and so it's a dream job. I host lots of events, have lots of conversations about advertising for a living, which is kind of awesome. And I spend time thinking about AI and VR and AR and emerging formats and technologies. So with that, I did make a deck, and I would love to share
All right, let
it.
me make you a co-host.
Thanks. And yes, I would love to share some slides with you, just to help kick off this discussion. Okay, so we've got PowerPoint, and let's do that. I'm gonna play from start. So, leveraging, David asked me to come, let's have a conversation around leveraging AI in 2024. I was like, this is massive, and how would we distill that? But based on, I actually just moderated a panel last week for the Black Policy Lab, which is an organization that's focused on using tech, kind of fusing technology and policy to make advancements and improve Black people's lives. And so we had a conversation last week around AI and the future of work, and something had come up in that. And so anyway, you guys and gals are all probably experts and well-versed in this as I am. So I wanted to kind of come up with some takeaways that I think about in terms of how you might think about leveraging AI in 2024. And so one is test and learn. I know everyone is testing, which is a thing, but I think you need to be very clear and rigorous as possible about what you're testing. And a couple of the slides that I will share will show how some other organizations are testing, because I think it's obviously no one has a playbook or a rule book for this yet, but you can't just be like, oh, we're going to test AI. It's like, what are the areas that you're testing? And then how do you collect those results? And then how do you inform sort of the rest of your organization or the rest of your processes? I think something that's going to be important is to develop your will do's and won't do's. So what will you or won't you use AI for? And that can change and evolve, but I think it's going to be important to kind of, at least at the beginning of the year, maybe set and say, we're definitely going to use AI for this. We might try using AI for this. We would absolutely love to not use AI for this, whether that's in your department or in your broader organization. I think it's going to be important to kind of draw some lines, even if those lines need to be sort of erased or changed over time. Needs to be cross-departmental. So whenever possible, you need to make sure you sync with other departments in terms of how they're planning to use AI, which tools they're using, what's going to happen, because you may find some synergies. You may find, and particularly if you're on the marketing end and the communications end. So I know we just saw the debacle with Sports Illustrated, and their CEO got fired because clearly they were not internally talking about how they were going to use AI, and also how their comms team was going to message that out to the world. So I think it's going to be really important to kind of look at how teams outside of marketing are planning to use AI so that you at least are informed. And then the other thing I would say is think about the impact on interpersonal processes, because it's not just the tech. It's going to reshape how your team and other teams work with each other. And I think that is a huge thing. And I have an anecdote about that that I would share. And then last but not least is address bias. And I know a lot of people have talked about this, and it's this very sort of big issue. And I think one very specific way that we can address bias, because it's not like we're going to be like, oh my God, we're going to make all of these different tools unbiased. I don't think that that's realistic. But I think what we can do is, on a case-by-case or tool-by-tool basis, seek out new sources of data to add to the mix, so that whatever tool or process or system that you're planning to use or develop, that you at least have an understanding of, hey, there's an additional data set that could be added to this. And I have an anecdote about that. So I will stop there and say, is anybody else thinking about this in the same way? Do these resonate? And then maybe we could dive into kind of the next couple of slides.
Just first that I'm curious about, though, is that, like, on a positive note, like from the organizations, LLMs, others you've seen, like, do you think that there's been any, like, not coming from like a group that say like Black or women or focus, but like from like some of the major players out there, do you think any are doing an especially good job at addressing the bias that's there and at least acknowledging the problem and trying to see where those solutions are?
So I think addressing that's actually a good it's very chunky. And I think to say we are going to address bias, which I mean, I think that's one of the bullets I put. I think it's harder to do than it seems. I know Amazon is one of the better companies. There's actually a woman, her name is Dr. Nashley Cephas. Amazon is actually has an entire team that's kind of dedicated. They bought her company, and her company was designed to create these data sets for them that actually added more Black and particularly lower income Black commerce data to their broader data set. And so I know that Amazon is definitely a company that I would imagine is doing some good on that front. I think that what's positive is that, and I don't know if this is an outcome of some of the focus on DEI that has been over the past couple of years, as well as some of the Me Too stuff. I think that companies are actually addressing it head on and saying, we know that there's bias, we know that there's issues. They're not pretending that it doesn't exist, which I think, admitting that you have a problem is the first step to having, to solving the problem. But I also think that, so like if you think about how LLMs are incorporated in various products and services that we use, I think it takes companies to really take a step back and go, hey, which data set did we use for this? And that's not happening. And I think it's just going to be, I think it's hard to do. And so I think companies are acknowledging the problem. I just don't know that there is a very simple and succinct solution.
Mm-hmm. Well, but that's a tremendous example that, like, at least like some people like that in positions of authority are contributing to in ways like that, because like that seems like the perfect way that Amazon can at least start to go and adapt and like acknowledge, like do something about some blind spots. So. But yeah, anything else from the from others here from the community?
I have something interesting. So we actually, one way to address, so there are two problems here. One is to use LLM like ChatGPT does, where you're looking at the entire data in the world and then trying to come up with answers. And another one is within companies to just use curated content that employees are searching for, are interested in, or find, and have a human curatorial process in order to create your data sets, and then use OpenAI to create queries and basically index that information. And I'm excited to say that today I just got a solution where we exactly do that. We have a solution where people can curate their content and then use OpenAI to find answers within the content that they have curated. For companies, I think that would be very valuable, so that, any kind of bias then comes from your own internal people, and then you can address that more directly, if that's the case.
I think that's a consistent theme. And is it Karen or Karan?
Karan, yes.
Karan. I think it's a consistent theme in that we have to, and I didn't include this because I feel like it's David, I just let somebody in the waiting room. I didn't include, don't forget the human in this, because I think that's inherent, right? I think that with all of these tools and all of these processes, there has to be a human or set of humans on the other end continuously sort of asking questions, whether it's refining the prompt, whether it's reviewing, the content that comes out, whether it's going to your corp comms team and saying, hey, we're doing this new AI thing. Are there any implications? So I think it's that combination of the human curation at every phase that is one that I think is one way that we mitigate the impact of bias. Because I don't think we're ever going to eliminate bias. I mean, we're humans, right? We're flawed. Like, and so how do we expect our machines to be more, since we program these tools, how do we expect these tools to be better than us?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like bias is subjective. It's more about facts, you know, and ultimately, whatever results there are, it gives us an opportunity then to look at the results and learn something new from it, right?
Mhm.
To go from a perspective of bias, I don't know what is bias to one person and not bias to
I
somebody else.
disagree on a small amount here, in that there ought to be ways for data sets to be analyzed,
Mhm.
and maybe you can't programmatically determine that it is completely free of bias, but you ought to be able to identify, and maybe it's identify and bubble up, to your point, you know, and a human gets involved, but a human has a short list of like, hey, wait a second, this thing's getting a score. And because of some tagging of the data set and backgrounds or whatever information, demographic information about the individuals or profiles that are ingested, like it starts to raise a red flag. Or even, I mean, God, I mean, I don't know why people don't even just do something as, I mean, it's a very blunt instrument, but things like skin color, if you've got photos, you ought to be able to at least surface some initial yellow flags, even if you can't go the next step and say, this is the good housekeeping seal of approval. It might just be like, this is a really messy house. Could you take a look at it before we start running it through an LLM? Does that make sense?
It does. And I think that, so an example that I have for that from, that's related to CIMM, we did a study at the end of last year, essentially to compare the match rates of when you use multiple data sets for targeting. This wasn't about sort of bias or AI or anything like that, but it was essentially, you know, the company used, let's say, 4 different data sets. One, it was, the first layer was like video amp data and Nielsen data. And so there were different, one household said it was 10 mil, one said 12 mil. Then they layered on, I think, Nielsen Catalina CPG data, because they were targeting for that. Data set in both companies got reduced by, like, let's say 2 million. Then they layered on Place IQ in-store purchase data. Data sets got reduced by even more. So you went from this audience size of 10 million down to an audience size of 6 million. And they analyzed what happened every time you layered on a different data set to target your audience. They also analyzed the different data sets and found that, for example, the Place IQ data skewed lower income because they were using quick, you know, QSR visits, and families that go to QSR restaurants versus higher end restaurants tend to have lower income. They also found, sort of in the Catalina data, it skewed higher towards seniors. And so again, ultimately the goal of this study was to say, when you layer on multiple data sets, here's what's going to happen to your match rates, and here's why. It wasn't about, oh, your data's biased, or, oh, you know, it's not good to use. It was essential, you know.
Someone used the term unintended algorithmic cruelty once, because, like, you know, you can have, I mean, Office Depot got in a lot of trouble with this. All they thought they were doing is running a campaign based at a zip code level, but they didn't realize they were doing this accidental overlay against skewing of different socioeconomic incomes and biasing, and, you know, people not being exposed to this, and it starts to quickly back into some unintended pieces.
So you actually can analyze the data. There are lots of ways that you can analyze it. And there's no, to your point, I don't think there's a good housekeeping seal, but I think, kind of to your point and to Karan's point, you have to have the question, you have to have some tools to kind of start to analyze things. And then you have to be prepared to say, look, this is the best, this is what we feel we've done sort of in the best case. However, we know that it skews this way or it skews that way.
One other thing that's interesting, so from an advertising standpoint, I think what you call bias may be called targeting, because all advertisers are constantly intent on targeting the right kinds of audience, aren't they? So, well, that's a different set of data than OpenAI data maybe?
Well, so I think there's proprietary data. I think again, it comes down to, that's why the comment was seek out new sources of data to add to the mix, because I think every data set has its own sense of bias, and bias doesn't necessarily have to mean bad, right? So there's a company called Streamlytics. Streamlytics very specifically focused on compensating users for the data sets that they created that they could then share with brands. They're like, look, we're in the era of targeting. You are the product. Here's, if enough people, if you are this profile, we want to, and advertisers and companies are going to profit from using your profile. We want to make sure you receive some income. Streamlytics started focused on Black consumers because they were like, this is the consumer set that we're focused on. So if you use the Streamlytics data set, it is going to be biased in favor, and biased not like against or for, it is going to be biased in that it has more African-American or Black household data than a different data set. Is that bad or is it good? It kind of just is what it is. And so I think the word bias doesn't have to necessarily mean bad. It just means this data skews this way, and you need to be aware that this is how this data skews.
Yeah, and I think even like ask that question, right? Because like assuming that basically any source it has bias, right? Almost by nature, like has to skew some way or another.
And Karan, maybe to one more point of yours, if I am trying to target Hispanic users, or I'm trying to target Black users, or I'm trying to target, families with children, it might be great for me to have a data set that is biased in that way, right? But I think it's just understanding that, and particularly from a broader media measurement standpoint, I think it's important to understand that if you're saying, oh, we're reaching 100% of US households, and you're using a data set that doesn't include Spanish speakers, then you're actually not. And you just need to kind of correct on that front. And so I think I'm going to switch to maybe our the next slide, which is the test and learn. I know so many people are testing and learning, but I think that we need to be rigorous in terms of what we're testing and learning. And I just have a couple of examples of how granular tests can be. So this is taken from a presentation that was given at a CIMM member meeting by David Schweidel. He's a professor of marketing at Emory University. He came and presented about how AI is going to change measurement. And I loved the slide because he essentially showed us, there's different applications that you can use AI for, right? Text, code, image-based speech, video, and other. The areas that he highlighted with the yellows are primarily where he thought that marketers would be focused. And so a lot of the chat GPT and generative AI tools that we're seeing are in this kind of top stack. It's content, it's email, it's chat bots for support, it's general writing. I think there's a lot of things like Otter AI for note taking, among other things. There's this whole area of code that is not necessarily the marketing side of things, but that's one area where we can start to see AI. The image generation is an example that I'm going to show now. And then video editing, one other area that he talked about that we might see coming to the forefront next year is going to be in voice synthesis. And David, I know you actually played with a tool that combined both video and voice, and you made like an avatar.
Yeah. Yeah. Hey, Jen, I'll put the link in a sec in there. But really, really easy to do too. So, but and this was also like, I mean, the crazy thing to me about a lot of the voice and video training right now is that like you can start doing this on like 30-second clips of of video or audio. And so yeah, here's a HeyGen link for those who haven't created one yet and haven't tried. Like seriously, like 5 minutes tops, and you can actually have something created. And then of course, just to complete the whole chain here, I use ChatGPT to come up with what to say for my avatar introducing this, right? So it's like, even in that sense, and part of this is real, right? It's like to eliminate my bias on like what I'd want my avatar to say. I'd be like just have some other third party that knows nothing about me just like come up with it and see, like, use words that I probably don't use, right? Like, make it as, and does it still seem that realistic? And I will say, if you use your webcam, if you use your phone instead of your webcam, it can get even better quality. So the version I have, and I'll find that too and share it, is like the worst possible version for free that HeyGen can produce, and it's insane. So imagine this with like a half hour of training and all this other data that you plug into it, and yeah, like I have no doubt that the better version could say fool my mom on the phone or something like that, which is really scary if you think of the telemarketers who are probably calling my mom right now.
Yeah, I have a question for you. It's not maybe a marketing question. It's more of an sort of ethical, not even ethical, but just sort of a esoteric perhaps question.
Mhm.
So you put your voice in and you allow HeyGen to take your voice and learn on it and then sort of create an avatar. Do you have any concerns about your voice being used in any way that sort of is not proprietary or not applicable to you, or could be harmful?
Yes, but I also don't know how to avoid it, right? Like for those of us who are remotely out there, like the idea that someone's scraping YouTube, scraping public Instagram posts, public Facebook posts, like public LinkedIn posts, so if I like Tameka, you'd be easy as hell to clone in that sense.
I know. Yeah.
And so many of us in the room, right? And that's also, if someone was like on like a college alumni video for 30 seconds, like that could be enough. If someone's looking for you and you're tagged in the post, and Adam is just like has the tiniest role in some hour-long video, it's so crazy. So I guess I could make things a little bit easier or harder to use for these training purposes. I mean, I use Bard. I don't know exactly how much Bard's use my own YouTube channels, let alone my Gmail or things like that. It's kind of scary. And I don't know how any of us, like, without just totally shutting down, closing things off, using the best privacy setting on OpenAI, and like not installing plugins on Google and anything, I don't know how to avoid it, and it is scary because like the bad versions of this, like those stores are going to be getting out a lot, and it's like bad enough for someone using my voice to scam my mom. That's
what I meant, and that's what I meant.
As bad as that is, like I'm also much much more scared for things like disrupting elections, or things like a fake Netanyahu calls a boss, and starts a geopolitical crisis.
Yeah, I mean that is the farthest extent, right? Like that's okay, calamity, world war, but then there's also the slightly less terrible. But then I go back to the communications and corp comm standpoint, right? Like how do you? What if someone records your CEO saying something, and then if you're a publicly traded company and it gets listed, like how do you mitigate for some of those things in terms of voice? So, but voice, the tangent, the reason we went off on that tangent is voice and audio in particular, I think we're going to see so if 2023 was kind of the year of Gen AI for visual and text, I think next year we're going to see a lot of development and growth in audio and voice. And so preparing to engage with Gen AI in that way and get your team prepared and sort of releasing products in that way, I think is something to think about.
Mhm.
So I think there are questions in the chat, by the way.
There's a lot of conversation and
That's good.
questions, and yeah, I told you I like this group. So.
So I wanted to share an example of when I say testing. So the team at Emory essentially wanted to use Gen AI. They wanted to determine sort of whether some use cases for Gen AI from a visual standpoint. So they essentially wanted to create display ads, interactive display ads, and they had humans do them, and they had AI tools do them. But this was kind of the process, right? They took images from the website, this was for a car advertiser. They took images from the website. They created a prompt that said, we want this to, you'll see in the next slide, we want this to be rugged, we want this to be luxurious or whatever. They then let the AI kind of pick the images, and then the humans, did it for post-production. So in terms of brand perceptions, so it's called Polestar, and so like these were the three kind of dimensions that they wanted to pick: ruggedness, luxurious, and then a combination. And so what you'll see here is the actual Polestar ad is the ad that came from the Polestar website. Like it took images from the Polestar that they had selected, their agency had selected themselves. The base ad was just a simple ad that a human created around the theme of ruggedness. The rugged ad, if you see here, is the ad that the generative AI tool created, the luxury, and that's the luxury ad that the human created, and then the combination ad. What you'll see is in the case of the actual ad, the generated ad performed better from an interesting standpoint than the actual Polestar ad from their website, as well as the car ad that the agency created. The generated Polestar ad performed better in terms of purchase intent than the actual ad from the brand's website, as well as the ads that the agency created. And so, it actually sort of dives much deeper into this than I'm explaining. But the point I wanted to highlight is they had very specific things that they wanted to test. They didn't say, oh my God, can we use the AI tool can we use this AI tool to do everything? They were like, no, can an AI generated tool pick better images? Can this AI generated tool combine these images better than a human person to do XYZ? Can this AI generated tool deliver results, in case of, in terms of interest or purchase intent? And so when I say test and learn, I'm like, it's kind of like start to come up with these scenarios in your head that you want to use AI for, and then figure out a testing model so that you can then say, hey guys, maybe we shouldn't use our team to make standard display ads. Maybe we should let the AI create these standard display ads and allow our team to do XYZ other things.
And I think there were some questions about like what do you know anything about like the tools used to create these ads, or
What's the question?
like what tools were used to create the generated ads, or?
So I do not have the exact examples of that. What I can do is I just took screenshots of the slides, because technically these were from our CIMM member meeting. And so what I'm going to do is I will ask David Schweidel, if I can share the deck with you guys all of, because it has a lot more information in there.
And yeah, if there's any info on the research tools as well, Chris was just asking. So, but any of that, then if you have any follow-up materials you can share, I'll make sure to share, not just with those on the call, but those others in AMG who might have missed this one.
So
Also,
yeah.
the prompts would be great to see too. And I think I'm really enjoying the conversation here around prompting, because one thing that it brings up to me is kind of the evolution between DALL-E 2 and DALL-E 3, which is where they added a loop into the network that rewrites your prompt. Right. And that's the way that they were able to sort of mitigate bias and also avoid like IP infringement and things like that by, you know, that literally like GPT goes in and reads and rewrites your prompts before it even produces anything, generates an image whatsoever, to remove specific individuals from your prompt and also to mitigate bias. Because I think one of the problems that they were having early days in DALL-E 2 is that you would say like woman looking at the ocean and it would be like a sexy woman with like a really sort of like anime bod, you know, and that's not the way that, you know, I necessarily think a woman should look when she's looking at the ocean. So I think that's a really interesting model for us to think about, is not only the human in the loop with the prompting, but how the model itself can revise and remove bias and, you know, enhance the prompt to get you the result that, you know, that we want.
I think prompting is such an interesting, like that's almost an area in and of itself, right? Is how do you create these prompts and how do you remove the bias from your question, but then also how do you create a prompt that gets you the result that you are looking for? Over the summer, I took an AI course. A friend of mine he just did it, and it was an AI course for nonfiction writers. And in the course of the first hour of this, it was a 3-week course, and we met twice a week for 2 hours. The first hour, the thing that hooked me, and the course wasn't super expensive, but the thing that hooked me was in the first hour, he used these prompts to get us, and maybe 5 of us in the group, to get us to define a story, define a topic for a book, basically outline the chapters of this book, and literally define our target audience and the intros to the chapters and everything. Was it a great book? No, it wasn't. But what it opened my eyes to was kind of this, the art of craft, the art of developing prompts. And what you may find is that there are different people on your team who are better at developing prompts than other people, right? Like I think in a very specific kind of writerly way. And so I might not be as good at generating prompts for a visual person versus someone from your art, you know, an art director from your team might not be the best person to develop prompts for your, you know, for your copy. So the art of prompting, I guess maybe one question I have for the group is, how are you, you know, how do you feel like you're good with creating prompts? Do you feel like you have to work on it? Are some tools better at responding to your prompts than others? Like you just talked about DALL-E, the previous version of DALL-E, and now this version. Do you feel like this version kind of gets your prompts pretty well?
I'll just hop in since I brought up
Yeah,
DALL-E.
yeah.
I think that I think it's all about experimentation. The more you play with tools, the more you see how they respond, and then it enhances the way that you prompt. I think more like you. I use it less for visual and more for, you know, writing and things like that. And I've been using a lot of the sort of logical prompting techniques that I'm seeing out there. So for example, giving the AI a role and talking about the output that you want and doing sequential prompting, like first do this, then do this, then do this, then do this, so that it knows the flow that it's supposed to move in. And then also asking it 5 different times the same thing to, sort of force it into giving you something that's more heightened than what you originally got. So, it's just really a matter of experimentation. And I think one of the things that is so key for all of us, whether it's in our work or, I'm a consultant and working with my clients, is just get people experimenting, get them in there every day, playing and, just living in the magic of what these things can dream up, because that's how you're really gonna, continue with the flow and be able to be at the forefront of everything that's happening and all the technology that's coming out.
Yeah, and it's the prompts from that class were worth it alone, right? Like obviously he could have put the prompts in a document, but seeing how he refined the prompts over time was super helpful. But like even just like I didn't know where to start. We created this essentially like a persona. We used ChatGPT to refine the persona for our book down to like, what are this person's motivations? And it all came from this prompt. One thing that surprised me about the prompts that he'd put in was like, he would tell it, do not, don't produce anything until it's clear that you understand, and make sure you tell me you understand. And then it would be like, I understand. And I was like, wow, I would have never thought, that I need to tell the tool to do this. Maybe one kind of fun random question is, and David, I think you asked this, do people say please and thank you? Like, do you when you prompt the tool? I still do. I'm like, ChatGPT, please do this. Or sometimes I say thanks. Like, are you actually doing that? And do you feel like it's, is it part of our job to make sure that these tools, that we infuse politeness into these tools?
Well, yeah. And like I started saying please to Alexa because I got the first Alexa device when my daughter was like an infant or toddler. And so like I need her to hear me say, please do this and that. I'm training my daughter, not the tech. Like, and now it's also fascinating that like you see this pop up every so often of like that ChatGPT and others respond better if you're really nice to it. And like I would love it if that is the bias, right? That you almost like have to be, be nice to it just to get a better response. Like I'm like if yeah, so I'll disagree with Michael on that one coming in from the chat, like not wasting some words.
Yeah. Oh, don't waste a message. Well, I guess if it's messages that are if it's on a per message basis. Yeah, no, like I don't just thanks. I don't just say thanks, ChatGPT. It's like, thank you, that was great. Can you do this? Right? Or can you do, or can you go back to that? Yeah. But I think, and that's kind of a segue into the develop your will do's and won't do's. AI is baked into so many different tools. I was using Upwork to find a video editor for a bunch of videos that we had created from an event. And, I started doing the thing and it was like, the prompt came up and it was like, hey, do you want to use AI for this process? And I was like, And initially, back to the kind of bias piece, I was originally like, no, I don't want to use AI for this. But that's because in my head, I instantly assumed it was going to use AI to help find my candidate, right? To help find the person who was going to, who's going to do our edits. But it's like, okay, sure, why not? And then I pulled up the thing and it was like, yeah, it's basically an AI tool that lets you write the job description. And I was like, yes, 100%, I want to use the AI for that. And that's the kind of the develop your will do's and won't do's. We're going to use AI. Like it's baked into everything. It's at this point, especially from a marketing perspective, but just kind of understand, what do you want to use AI for and what do you not? Like, I don't want to use AI to determine candidates for anything because I'm concerned about bias. I'm less concerned about bias when it comes to writing a press release or when it comes to drafting something. And so that's the kind of develop your will do's and won't do's, and whether, whether it's, whether you're going to use AI for something else. The 2, 3, and 4 are kind of interlinked, the cross-departmental piece, and then to think about the impact into personal processes. There is another marketer who you might actually invite her to join this, David. Her name's Deanna Zamet. Do you know Deanna?
Oh, yeah, I knew Deanna. Yeah.
So she just put out a report that was talking, like a big deep dive that was talking about how marketers are planning on using AI. I think they surveyed 150 marketers, and a couple of things that came out of that, especially this first one, marketers are using Gen AI to increase volume and versatility, but at least half think it will lead to staff reductions. And so as you are thinking about using these tools and bringing them into your team, I think you have to think about the efficiency that we are all aiming for. So if you don't need to use a person from a paid search perspective, if you don't need to use someone to generate a keyword list, and you use Gen AI to generate the keyword list, and then the person sort of creates the PPC campaign, and let's say you actually do reduce headcount, because that's that's part of efficiency, unfortunately, which is part of the concern. Now that there's one less person on your team, how does that impact everybody else's job? Do they have to pick up more slack? Do they have to take more work? And so that's the piece where it's like, start to think about, as we use these tools, what are the interpersonal and unseen impacts of using these tools? One more stat from this report was kind of, what are some of the biggest challenges? And this goes back to, I think, what we were just talking about. Creating the prompts is difficult. The revising the output is difficult. I don't know about you, but I find, especially from an editing standpoint, editing someone's work that is atrocious is almost for me a lot harder than starting from scratch. Like, I'd honestly rather write something myself than edit something that's terrible. And so figuring out how to get good outputs from the onset is a thing. People just not sure where it fits in their workflow, and then other people are kind of worried about inaccuracies. So I think it definitely comes down to thinking about the little parts in your workday where it helps to talk to someone or not. I'll give one more example, and that is, we have an event. I was reviewing some pitches for an event, and for a presentation at an upcoming event, and it was about audio. And it was essentially, this company did a test, and they had an AI only team, a human only team, and an AI and a human team together. And they literally had these teams sort of go through a pitch process for their idea as if they were an agency. And the AI only team scored higher in the initial pitch, scored higher in the second round of revisions, but then ultimately the AI and human teams submission won. And so hopefully this case study will be presented at an upcoming ARF event if it gets selected. But the AI team won everything. The AI only team actually won at every phase. And what the premise of the submission was it's not that AI is going to take everybody's jobs. Yes, the AI did better, but there were various elements. But it was, what it forced them internally to do was look at how the pitch process was broken within their agency. It forced them to look at, this worked much easier for an AI than the team. And that's kind of what I'm coming back to with kind of the cross-departmental collaboration and the interpersonal. It's kind of looking at these gaps and these areas where these tools are going to make our lives and our jobs much better as marketers, but how do we think about how we relate as teams, and whether someone from a team feels eclipsed, whether they actually lose their job, whether they feel more empowered to do other things. If there's, let's say there is someone on your team who now has 2 to 3 extra hours a day, how do you empower them to, how do you give them new work? How do you think about keeping them engaged if some of the tasks that they, that were optimizing their time, they don't have to do those tasks anymore. How do you keep them engaged? How do you retain your employees? And so I think it's just, you know, thinking about AI, not just as this tactical tool, but also from a higher level business perspective, what does it do to our business?
Love that. It's great. We just have 5 minutes left. I just want to say, like, any last questions for Tameka from here? I know we covered a lot, so.
I have one question on one of the previous slides.
Sure.
I saw the stat that like over 50% of, I think, the difficulty in using AI was in the revision, I want to say, of things. Is that referring to like revision of copy, revision of images? And if so, if revision is taking a lot of time, when you then account for the fact, like, how does that compare to starting from scratch? Like, I mean, because part of the whole point of AI is to make it, it's like an assistive tool, right? Rather than starting from a blank page, you're starting from 70% of a good enough piece of copy or a good enough blog post or something like that. Does it still, because this almost makes it seem like it's worse to have used the AI rather than to have maybe started from scratch, or am I interpreting that statistic incorrectly?
So that's a good question. I think it's probably much, the research does not, and you can download her report. It's free. I'll find the link and drop it in the chat, but I do not know. But I think that they were saying, I think it has to do with, one, the initial prompt that you use and or the tool that you use, because sometimes the quality of the tool is not so good. So like I have two, some people use Otter AI. I don't know if you know Otter, right, to record meetings. The transcripts from Otter are actually pretty darn good. I use a meeting service called Dialpad, which has AI embedded in it, and the transcripts are actually pretty bad. And so I think it has to do with which tool you use, right? If I had to, let's say, create an article based on the transcripts from Dialpad, it would take much longer than me making an article from the transcripts from Otter AI. So I think it's a function of both the tool that's used and probably the prompts that people put in. Because I agree with you. Do I want to start from scratch? Like staring at a blank page is not the best thing in the world. But if I ask the tool to write a press release about an award ceremony, and I didn't set up the prompts for like what a press release needs to contain, then I'll wind up with something that's garbage that I have to edit. So I think it's a function of the tools that were being used, as well as kind of the information that was put into them. What has your experience been like, though? Do you have problems? Do you find that you are spending more time revising things?
Well, I come at it more from like the as like a technologist building this tool. So I maybe have less domain experience as much as I want to believe that the tool on the whole, in the objective sense, is actually still better than starting from a blank page. So that's why that stat was curious to me, is because it seems like this almost makes it feel like because of maybe not prompting correctly or an output that is drastically different from what you had in mind, it made it sound like it was actually worse to have started with that tool, which is interesting to me. And that's really was the source of the question.
And I think it definitely depends on the tool, right? Like even ChatGPT has gotten much better even in the past couple of months than it was originally.
That's right.
Yeah, well, Tameka, we're hitting the hour mark. This really flew by. So thanks everyone for the engaging conversation and multimodal conversation, I guess, is becoming the word of the year, along with Gen AI. So great to see. I think next week we'll do like a community chat jump ball for anyone who wants to bounce around ideas and hear what each other's up to and interested in. This is amazing. Like, Tameka, hope you come back sometime, share some more of your findings and thoughts. Any other good ways? Sorry.
Even just listen to the next one. I would love to.
Great. Well, you're welcome any and every time. Any other ways that people should follow you?
Oh yeah. please connect with me on LinkedIn. You can obviously join CIMM if that's applicable for your organization. I also have a podcast with Lindy Johnson from Ad Monsters. It's called Tech and Soul. We're just focused on kind of tech and soul and the soulful aspects of it. And feel free to email me, David. I will send you the deck and my email address. And just please feel free to reach out.
I'll pop that into Slack for everyone. So thanks everyone for joining. Have a great rest of your week.
Thank you.
And see you soon. Yeah.